Chapter 109, Speaking of the Coming Year in Qingyu Hall. In the tea store, casually hold some water to drink. Brother and sister, two people, are a little distracted to re-enter the road. Not long after walking, will see Wang Qinian, a cadre of carriages, to pick up their own. The identity of the other party here, and look at the expression, is a bit strange. The mood is not very high. Wang Qinian naturally do not dare to nag what. Why did His Holiness appear here? Fan Ruo leaned on the carriage, holding a handkerchief and fanning her slightly sweaty face, her appearance looking extremely agreeable. Fan Xian replied with a bitter smile, "This His Majesty of ours has always lived in deep simplicity. I have long expected, how can a man stay in a palace full of palace grudges and the smell of fat and powder all year round? He will definitely come out often to take a break, and it's only natural that he would walk to the banks of the flowing crystal river. It's just that earlier there was some fun. I always thought that Lord Gongdian would call him Master Huang." Fan Ruo puffed a laugh and said, "Where can everything be like the stories that my brother said? If that's the case, you should have long ago gone to open a book-telling store." Speaking of a book-telling store, Fan Xian immediately thought of a tofu store and asked with a frown, "Ruo, what are you going to do in the future?" Fan Ruo looked gloomy. Nowadays, in these years, after a woman gets married, she is married to her husband and embroiders flowers and manages the backyard. With Ruo's knowledge and ability, if she spends her life like this, I'm afraid she will be a bit reluctant to do so. Just can't do more planning at the moment, so we have to do this for the time being. After entering the capital, the carriage went straight to the 28-mile slope. This 28 miles of slope is not a big hill, just a famous place name in the south of Beijing. That is to say, hundreds of years ago, Kyoto is far from today's broad time. 28 miles of slope is the last section of the hill before entering the capital. From the southwest direction of the official highway on the last stagecoach stops are 28 miles. Whenever the car and the horse to this time line the last 28 miles of the road, the horse, lack of people, tired, extraordinarily fatigued, will be the last section of a hill, then the seaside. The name of the 28-mile slope is derived from the name of the hill. This is where the name 28-mile slope comes from. Nowadays, the 28-mile slope had long since been incorporated into the city wall and turned into a street. Only the name remained, and Qingyu Hall was located here. The carriage stopped far away. Fan Xian and his sister walked down and walked along the street to the other side. Along the road saw a row of neatly organized small storefronts, all of which are the kind of cheap wood transported from Lingnan, brushed with varnish on top. With spots clear, if a glance over, it feels like countless monocular monsters are looking at themselves with a tiger's eye. Fan Xian bluffed and asked curiously, "Why are they all using this?" This kind of practice was commonly used in the small restaurants in his previous life, with a clear water of logs, cheap and refreshing. Wang Qinian shook his head. "He is not business material." Fan Ruo explained, "This is Qing Yu Tang. Each facade is the place of apprenticeship of a big shopkeeper. 17 shopkeepers. There are 17 rooms." Fan Xian counted and realized that there were a total of 24 such small houses along the street, and asked his sister why this was so, and Fan Ruo said in no uncertain terms, "These many years have gone by, and there are always some shopkeepers who have gotten older and started to retire, or who have died of illness." The group of people talked and walked to the very front. It was a very somewhat beautiful mansion. The courtyard was very large. Looking at the eaves that crossed the courtyard wall, it should have been divided into many courtyards inside. Fan Xian's heart stirred, feeling somewhat familiar, and only after thinking about it did he remember that this was more or less the same style as the Taiping village that he had seen on the banks of the Lujing River earlier. The place where these shopkeepers lived was a bit strange, and there were no 3 words Qing Yu Tang written on the gate. At this time their fan house guards came forward to pass the name tag. The doorkeepers saw the name on the name tag, immediately knew that the visitor is recently in the capital of the great publicity Fan de Duc, hurriedly and respectfully invited to enter, because the 7 leaves of the 7-leaf shopkeeper is currently the Fan family to help take care of the Tanyu bookstore, so even the notification of this degree are exempted. Just about to enter the house, the court is responsible for the supervision of the Qingyu Hall of people, but hit the crossover, is ready to ask questions to examine the identity of the guests. Wang Qinian is coldly looked at each other 2 eyes, even their own do not bother to appear, let the group of a junior to cope with, along with Fan Xian will go to the hall. The one who supervised Qingyu Hall was also from the supervisory yuan, so he immediately knew he had done something redundant. Entering the hall, he was seated and served tea. Sitting at the head of the table was a man about 40 years old, with a supple brow and eyes that seemed to have made the whole person cautious under the weight of all these years. However, Fan Xian knew that the other party was the chief shopkeeper of Qing Yutang, known as Yi De. When the main Yi family's most important business, it was not as boring and useless as what he saw in front of him, he couldn't help but say with a slight smile, "I have always thought that the shopkeeper is very old and virtuous, but today when I saw it, I realized that the shopkeeper was originally so young." Yi Big Shopkeeper completely do not know this Fan Gongzi today to Qingyu Hall in the end for what, although more than 10 years have passed, the Yi family has long been not what taboo, but is tantamount to being disguised as a house arrest in the capital for more than 10 years. His temperament has long been unlike when that kind of jumping and bold, his body has been rickety. The heart of the gas is also light. A lot of bitter smile responded, has long been an old man, Fan. Fan Xian laughed and said, "I've been an old man for a long time, but I'm sorry to hear that." Fan Xian smiled and said, "Let's get right to the point. The first thing that happened today is that Tanyu Bookstore's business is extremely good, and I wanted to come and thank shopkeeper Seven Leaves, as well as see what Qingyu Hall looks like." Yi Big Shopkeeper smiled and responded, "Mr. Fan paid for us to do things. Naturally, we have to let Mr. Fan earn his money. If you do business and still lose money, this Qing Yutang is afraid that it would have already collapsed in the capital." Speaking of earning money, Grand Manager Ye's eyes naturally showed a sense of confidence, and his body radiated with a glow. Fan Xian secretly praised in the bottom of his heart, thinking that this is what his own mother should look like when she taught him, and said politely with an arch of his hand, "In fact, today, there is a Tsubaki thing to specially trouble the big shopkeeper." Yi Big Shopkeeper heart flinch, if only for business, the other identity of noble, not to personally come, is the other side and the thought of what? Yi Big Shopkeeper has to think for the life safety of so many shopkeepers and fellows and relatives in Qingyu Hall in the capital. He didn't dare to listen to what the other party thought, and refused with difficulty. There are clear rules in the imperial court. People in Qingyu Hall aren't allowed to leave the capital, and if Mr. Fan is too ambitious, Qingyu Hall can't really help much. Fan Xian laughed and said, "I naturally know this. Today I came, I just want to ask Yidajo to be a person's teacher. As far as I know, over the years, the court has been some of the officials of the Ministry of the Household and the Inner Treasury Manpower, is worshipped in the Qing Yutang's door, specializing in the way of business. I'm comfortable with the cooperation of the Seven Leaves shopkeepers, and so I also want to introduce a student." Shopkeeper Yi was curious, "I wonder what kind of person." Fan Xian smiled faintly and did not say anything. Grand Shopkeeper Yi understood and said softly, "Your guest has come from afar. Why don't you let my wife take Miss Fan to the back garden for a stroll?" He looked at Fan Roro with a smile and said, "Although this courtyard of ours is not surprising, back then it was also designed by the family head himself, and it is quite impressive." Fan Roro understood, smiled faintly and went to the back garden with the shopkeeper's wife. And Wang Qinian and the others were driven out by Fan Xian with a wave of his hand. Seeing him being so cautious, Shopkeeper Yi couldn't help but be scared, wondering just who was going to learn the ways of business. "Fan Xija, my second brother." Fan Xian took a sip of tea and said softly, "You should have heard of it." Boss Ye's heart was shocked, thinking that although Fan's second son had no gap at the moment, there was after all the family fortune of Sananbo sitting there. Powerful noble children, how could they be willing to come to learn the end of the road of business? Could it be that this Fan de Duke in front of him wants to borrow this matter, so that Fan Xija cannot inherit the title? But this kind of clumsy ploy is not too ridiculous and not feasible. Fan Xian didn't think that Grand Shopkeeper Yi would think so much, and said in a soft voice, "My second brother is a good businessman by nature, but at the moment he is only relying on the genes and hobbies in his bones to hold on. And in the future, if he wants to really do something about it, his abilities are still a bit insufficient, so I hope that he will have the honor to be under the door of the Grand Shopkeeper." Mr. Yi shook his head hurriedly. Being as cautious as he was, he definitely didn't dare to get involved in these matters, and shrugged it off by saying, Squire Fan is in charge of the world's money and food, and his business is bigger than anyone else's. So this is just a small area of Qing Yu Tang. How can I dare to teach Mr. Fan? Fan Xian was slightly disappointed, but he was in no hurry, thinking that according to his own plan, Yu, the teacher, will always be unable to escape. He sat quietly in his chair, slowly mobilizing the true qi at the snowy mountain. All 4 chakras were open, closed his eyes and meditated for a little while, confirming that none of his keen ears had heard who was eavesdropping. And only then did he lower his voice and say, There's still one more thing. I don't know if the grandpapa can dare to listen. If you dare to listen, I'll dare to speak. Seeing him so mysterious, Grand Shopkeeper Yi smiled helplessly, knowing that even if he didn't listen, the other party was bound to speak. As expected, Fan Xian smiled and said, I'm now the Tai Palm Temple Conciliator. Seeing him say this sentence without a head or tail, Yi de Boss was a bit puzzled, but still respectfully said hi, knowing that the gentleman in front of him was about to Shanghai which nobleman in the palace. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian followed up with, My fiancée is the Lin family's young lady. He knew that the titular Grand Boss Yi, although he had sat in Kyoto for 15 years withered away, must have had many channels to know certain secret stories many years ago. As expected, Grand Shopkeeper Yi's face changed drastically, staring deathly into Fan Xian's eyes as he said coldly, What exactly is Mr. Fan trying to say? Fan Xian faintly responded, Within 2 years at the latest, it will be possible for me to take control of the management of the inner treasury. But I know that I am not capable enough, and since my father's side of the Ministry of Revenue is ultimately the wealth of the state, while I have to take care of the wealth of the palace, I can't be of too much help to me, and I. He looked back at the eyes of Yi de Boss without much emotion, and said word by word, Need help, need your help.